Sometimes people are going out of their out of what their economic status tells them they can do, and that's become a big problem because they're forced to take out student loans, which is supposed to help them elevate their status, but instead generally keeps lots of them in lower middle class settings. So what has to be done is we have to fix some issues with our education system in that you have too many people going directly to college instead of additionally important things such as trade schools, craft schools that are in a few years might crash because you have too many people that are thinking that college is the only way forward.
Thank you, Mr. Tang. We open CR questions towards Mr. Kuja right now. So any questions?
It doesn't have to be on education, right? It could be on any.
We prefer it to be on education because we will cover things later, but if you don't have one on education, I guess that's okay.
Oh, CR? Wow.
CR from CR from Colorado.
Okay, so this is not related to education, but
What's your name?
Miranda, and I'm from Colorado. And the question is for all candidates. How do you all plan to deal with terrorists?
You have 1 minute.
So yes, terrorism is a very big issue, and I believe that we need to do concentrated airstrikes on where this is very important, but we will not put boots on the ground. We will not sacrifice our people for this fight for terrorism. This is a very good question, and it's very controversial, but in addition to airstrikes, we will pursue diplomacy with our allies in the Middle East, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, and in Europe even, so that we provide aid to the civilians and we don't help fund ISIS at all. We make sure we limit them. And we also need to stop Russia involvement in the Middle East, because this is a very big issue at the moment. They are bombing Aleppo, they are killing innocent civilians, and if I'm elected, I will pursue war crime accusations on them and the destruction of the innocent lives in Aleppo. So yes, ISIS is a very big issue abroad, but I believe that if I'm elected, I will be able to stop it.
Mr. Lorenz, you have a minute to respond.
Diplomacy is the best policy in any circumstance. We should always try to pursue diplomacy whenever possible, and that's why I believe that the UN is our best bet to solving world affairs, like ISIS, like Putin in Russia. That's why we should work with the UN to get our boots out of the ground from the Middle East and get our allies there working to solve their own problem in there. We should focus on being at home and get our boys back home as well. That's why we should also work with the UN in Europe, in Russia, with Putin. We know that there's been some involvement in our current election with the Russians, as has been reported by our FBI, and we should be looking into that. We should be investigating that with the UN to see if there's any war crimes in there.
Thank you, Mr. Lorenz. Mr. Lorenz, you have a minute.
ISIS has become a major threat not only in the Middle East, but also abroad. If you look at attacks in both America and Europe, you're seeing civilians of our country being killed, but if you look back to the Middle East, you're also seeing civilians in their own countries being killed. What has to be done is we have to declare war on ISIS. We have to send troops. We have to organize with the Turkish soldiers, the Kurdish soldiers, and everyone who is willing to help to take down ISIS as swiftly and effectively as possible. This would be done by first taking where the money is at, which means we have to take the oil fields. And then once we take the oil fields, we have to stop ISIS recruitment, which is by going online, which if you look at Twitter, if you look at Facebook, you're seeing lots of people being recruited to ISIS through those means. And once you get those two, you can divert ISIS away from cities, away from civilians, and then attack them with force.
Thank you, Mr. Tang. This issue helps us transition to our next topic, foreign policy. Kai?
Okay, so yeah, this actually is a great transition. Our first question under foreign policy has to do with very similar things. So this question will be directed at Mr. Lorenz first. Can you describe more of your foreign policy and how you plan to deal with terrorism, ISIS, immigration, or refugees? You have a minute to respond.
I believe that we should let a certain portion of the Syrian refugees into America. They have rights just as we do, and they need to be taken care of because their home is not as good as ours are, and that's why we should focus on making our collective home, the world, a better place. And in terms of ISIS, that means that, like I've said, working with other countries in the Middle East, in working with the UN, to getting ISIS out of the Middle East, to getting it out of the world, is what we need to do. And so we're going to send troops from the Middle East, who are, obviously aligned with us, from countries that are allied with us, get them into Syria, getting them into countries that will combat ISIS on their terms, on their turf.